Welcome to the second part of my How to Yak tutorial. In the first one I said a few things about the basics, but today we will talk about the important stuff. How to fight in the Yak-1, how to shoot enemies down and how to survive to tell the story. I will cover the tactics, the maneuvers and some tips to squeeze the last bit out of the Yak-1. I hope you enjoy. First, let's take a look at the performance in relation to the opponents. Well, the Yak is known for its maneuverability, it's not really known for its speed. However, while it doesn't do wonders in regards of top speed, the Yak isn't really slow either, especially on lower altitudes. If we just assume a simple deck race between rival aircraft, we can see that the Yak can stay with the F4 for quite a while. The F4 outruns the Yak after a while. The F4 is on combat power about 10 to 20 kph faster, so roughly estimated it takes over 1.5 minutes to get 500 meters distance from the Yak. That's painfully long. However, such deck chases aren't really the norm, and the fact remains that every German fighter is still outpacing the Yak in a straight line. Especially the Focke-Wulfs, which are even at combat power at least 40 kph faster. And it doesn't really get better with increasing altitude. Above 4000 meters the performance of the Yak drops drastically, and even before that the advantage of the German fighters gets bigger and bigger with increasing altitude. This shows in all performances: climb rate, top speed and acceleration. Especially if a combination of those factors is needed to get an enemy, the Yak struggles hard. For example, if you have to chase a 109 in a shallow climb and in a lazy turn. The 109 is then not only faster but outclimbs the Yak as well. The German fighters are able to gain vertical and horizontal separation at will if they fly their aircraft smart and with situational awareness. Furthermore, they keep speed much better after dives. They have a higher never exceed speed and therefore can dive away from engagement at high altitude effectively. At speeds above 500 kph, the Yak becomes harder to maneuver around all axes. However, the Yak rolls better than a 109 at those speeds, but rolls worse than a 190. The Yak starts to disassemble at roughly 720 kph, and before that the control surfaces starts to flutter and the stick is shaking heavily. So a typical beginner's mistake is to dive on an enemy and to get fast in the process, so he can't control the elevator anymore. To lose that elevator eventually, and then obviously not being able to pull up anymore. Only then to recognize that he can't open the canopy at that speed. From there he has a few seconds left to contemplate his life choices. Yes, it's really a delighting moment. The acceleration of the Yak is fine at low speeds, but not more. If you really take a look with a stopwatch, we see that the acceleration on the deck are somewhat comparable to a Bf-109 F4 from low to medium speeds. But as soon as we talk about accelerations from 400 kph to higher speeds, the Yak needs much more time to get there than a 109. But enough of the disadvantages of a Yak, let's take a look at some advantages. The energy retention in turns is just good. Rolls and turns don't need that much energy and allows for spectacular maneuvers, even after some sustained turning. This leads to the fact that the Yak outturns every German plane in an instantaneous turn on medium speeds and is able to pull some nice follow-up turns. The roll rate is at medium speeds quite nice, giving it a nice edge against 109s, which often come in at high speeds and are locked up and can't roll that good. But the most apparent trait of the Yak is an insane stability at almost all speeds. Only at a very high and very low speeds the Yak has some weaknesses in maneuverability. At super low speeds the aircraft likes to drop a wing, while a 109, thanks to the leading edge slats, still can maneuver effectively. Furthermore, the Yak doesn't like too much rudder input in those maneuvers since the latest FM update, and the mentioned stalls at very low speeds are more sudden and without much warning. The mystical turnfight image of the Yak-1 really comes from the fantastic controllability. It responds really well to all inputs at a wide range of speeds and flies like a dream. Another bonus in quotation marks is the very easy handling of the engine. While you have to control the engine yourself, you still can't wreck the engine. Even on purpose, you have to close the radiators for like 5 minutes and ignore every temperature gauge for quite a while. Another bonus of the manual engine control is that you can adjust the engine settings much better to your needs if you know what you are doing. For example, if a really cold run Yak meets a very hot run F4, for example the F4 just came out of the turn fight and is now run very hot. The Yak pilot is very accustomed to close the radiators to get more speed, while the 109's automated radiator tries to deal with the heat first. So it will open the radiators fully, which slows down the aircraft to that extent that the usually faster 109 is then on the deck slower than the Yak. If then the F4 pilot doesn't close the radiators manually, he is toast. At this point, another tip, which I did not mention in the first video, I just forgot it actually. Below 1000 meters, the Yak's propeller pitch governor doesn't work very efficiently and the propellers are inducing some drag. So much drag that full RPM isn't the best setting. Reducing the RPM to about 90%, or in numbers 2550 revolutions per minute, gives you a few kph more, which closes the gap between Yak and F4 even more. It's about 6 kph difference, which can make a difference in a fight. So that all being said, let's conclude. The Yak comes somewhat close to the 109's performance on the deck, and only in very special situations it can surpass a 109's top speed. The Yak has no chance to win a climbing duel if done in a shallow angle, and only can follow if the 109 pulls up very steeply and stays in gun range of the Yak. Against Focke-Wulfs, the Yak has no chance to win a deck race, but wins in a climbing duel if the Focke-Wulf is climbing too steeply. In a high speed climb, the Yak will still struggle. The Yak outturns every German fighter from low to medium speeds, but has to be aware that at super low speeds the skilled 109 pilot has the edge, and that the Focke-Wulf outturns the Yak at high speeds. So how do you fight an aircraft which can't catch its enemies in a straight line? Right. You don't catch them in a straight line. You catch them while they are on lower energy states and have no chance to play to their strength. The easiest possibility to do that is to fly higher than the enemy and to drop on them. Yes, the Yak hasn't the best high altitude performance, but that doesn't mean it can't be used on high altitudes at all. So dive on your enemy and shell him into oblivion. Those occasions are often the reason for the mystical image of the Yak being faster in certain situations. It's obviously not faster in a straight line, but of course after a dive. And something during your diving attack, the German fighter pilot spots you, and if he judges the energy state incorrectly, he tries to respond with a steep climb to exploit his good climb rate. This obviously doesn't help him if you have much more energy than him. In that case, you can use your speed you build up in the dive just to climb after him and to blast him out of the sky. This really worked for me countless times. Another situation which develops rather often is that you see an enemy aircraft on your altitude diving down to attack something or whatever. And the first instinct tells you in that moment to dive after him. If that dive isn't that steep and you are kinda close, it makes sometimes sense to do that and to follow him directly. But that is very dependent on the situation. But very often German fighter pilots like to dive very steeply, and diving after those guys costs first a ton of energy, and secondly the Yak can't regain that energy quickly, and thirdly you run into the danger of getting too fast in that dive. So to work around that, I like to stay on the altitude I'm at, or I spiral down a little bit while I keep an eye on the enemy. At this point here, it's very handy if you have flown German fighters already and if you know that they want to regain as much energy as possible, and the only way to do that is to climb back up after a while. More often than not, you will see the guy which just dove down coming back up, Most of the time they are looking down to the guy they just attacked, and they don't have an eye on their upper rear, a moment I really like to exploit. If the enemy sees you while he's coming up and manages to evade you, he has one valid option basically, and that is to dive away. If he, however, decides to climb into you and he tries to get up to you, you have one single job: to keep his energy lower than you with mounting attack after attack until he's either shot down or that he has to disengage. If he dives away and has altitude to work with, don't follow. It makes no sense. But if the deck is close and if there is nobody else around, enter a shallow dive by putting the reticle well in front of him, close the radiators, lower your RPM a bit and chase him. The shallow dive makes better use of your energy while the enemy on the deck decelerates after a while. And depending on the speed and the energy states, you maybe can catch him. Other regular situations where you can attack enemies from a clear energy advantage are, for example, attackers while they turn around after their attack run, fighters in dogfights, and so on. I like to attack enemies which are distracted already and don't fight back, and I like to use whatever brings me to that distraction. Goal is to get in and to get out of the situation quickly with spending the least amount of time possible. The less time is used actually shooting down the enemy, the more time I have to work on my situation awareness, which is needed to get in those situations in the first place. You are maybe surprised that I use tons of energy fighting tactics instead of turn fighting tactics, which maybe comes first to mind if you fly any aircraft which turns well. But with the turning capabilities comes not only the possibility to outturn the enemy, but at the same time the possibility to bleed off speed very fast in those very nice turns. That often leads to the moments where Yaks or Spitfires basically turn on the spot only to fall out of the sky after a few turns. Those hard turns work very well against enemies which don't know what they are doing. But as soon as you meet a half-decent pilot, you crave for those kph you just let off in the turn a few moments ago. That doesn't mean that I don't utilize the good turning capabilities of the Yak, but I use it as a weapon in certain situations. Basically, I try to actively think about using energy for a turn. My motto while flying good turning planes is turn as wide as possible but as tight as needed. The wider the turns are, the more speed you will conserve. That speed can be later used for hard turns or to catch enemies. Keeping speed is the key element in all my planes I fly. And all this is the reason I don't like those tags on planes like some people do. Like, this is a turn fighter, or this is an energy fighter, or this aircraft is a good boom and zoom aircraft. This is all total bollocks in my opinion and limits your mindset how an aircraft can be and should be flown. Often you don't have the luxury to meet your enemy with a clear-cut energy advantage. Actually, you will meet a lot of enemies at the same or with more energy because it's so damn easy for the Germans to gain energy quickly. But let's talk about a fight on the same energy level first. If the enemy hasn't seen you yet, it's quite clear, I guess, what you have to do. Just get close from the low 6 and as soon as the enemy fills out half or more of the gun sight, shoot him down. He is about 200 meters away by then. If the enemy sees you before the attack, the fitting reaction to that is very, very dependent on the circumstances. For example, which plane the enemy is flying, on which altitude you are, or if other enemies are around and so on. But let's assume it's a 1-on-1 against a 1-on-9. A smart 1-on-9 pilot will try as quickly as possible to change the situation from an equal energy affair to a clear-cut energy advantage. But many other pilots try to attack you here and there, and if they don't get a lucky hit, you should be able to defeat those pilots with some maneuvering. It's important to remember that you can't outclimb your enemy, so be careful with vertical maneuvering. However, some vertical components can be useful at times to gain an energy advantage. Some 109 pilots are quite wasteful with their energy, and if they are turning hard in certain maneuvers, you can climb a little to get the energy advantage quickly. From there on you can even boom and zoom your enemy, but generally speaking this is a rare occasion. If you meet a higher skilled pilot, he will maybe try to attack you in a slashing attack, but at the latest he will push through after the attack and will start to climb in a shallow angle. If you're too far away at this point, there's nothing what you can do against that, but sometimes they are close enough to get a few shots off. And that can cause a justified or a panicked reaction, and they start to maneuver. From there on you can stick with them, doing as gentle turns as possible until you are close enough to shoot them down. This situation develops quite often on the deck where they can't dive away anymore. If they start to do defensive maneuvers, you can outturn them, but be careful not to get too slow. A very high skilled pilot will be dangerous even in those situations. A low speed 109 is nothing to joke about. Use your flaps and your throttle to prevent overshooting. If you are overshooting, go vertical, but keep an eye on the enemy if he's able to climb after you. Use your maneuverability to stay out of his gun envelope. Keep in mind that you can deploy your flaps much quicker and use that to your advantage. For example, I use the flaps to slow me down quickly in case a 109 wants me to overshoot, or I use flaps to stabilize my aim in low speeds. Sometimes I use them in rolling scissors, for example, if the enemy is super aggressive. If the enemy comes from behind, I like to do a split S. In cruising speeds, the 109 has a lower roll rate than a Yak and has some trouble to follow that split S. If the 109 follows the maneuver, I like to start a barrel roll to exploit the now even lower roll rate at that now higher speed. Often the 109 just can't follow this and overshoots. If the 109 is smart, he will push through and try to get into the energy advantage. This is a little bit sad, but at least the enemy is off your tail. If you are fighting 190s, you should be a little bit more careful with rolls, as 190s have on all speeds a better roll rate, but they can't turn as hard usually. So to shake a 190, put an emphasis on the turning component of your maneuvers. Focke-Wulfs really don't like turning. They bleed off speed very quickly in a turn. If a 190 follows your turns, you should be able to beat him easily. Same goes if he tries to outclimb you. 190s aren't good climbers as well. However, an experienced 190 pilot will attack you, but he won't turn and he won't climb. After the attack, he will just fly straight through and keep his speed. To avoid this, you should try to conserve as much speed as possible while evading the attack. If you have enough speed after the roll and the maneuver was precise enough, you maybe can shoot from range. And with a lot of luck, the shots damage the 190, but sometimes the pilot just panics and they start to maneuver. A good opportunity to catch up. If you have a 190 low and slow in front of you, the only thing you should be aware of is a good roll rate. But other than that, a 190 shouldn't be able to get away from you that easily. When fighting in a Yak-1, you have to engrave into your brain that you can't outrun most of your enemies. So either you have to get them into a fight and shoot them down quickly, or you have to defend yourself as long as possible until he breaks off the fight. Buying time is often a key element of a fight in a Yak. So in an energy disadvantage, which often develops if you can't hinder the enemy in time, it's often crucial just to evade the attacks with some clear-cut maneuvers, like rolls and split S and so on. Try to conserve as much energy as possible while dragging the enemy down lower. Try not to end up on the deck, however. While you have the best performance on the deck, you have the disadvantage that the deck limits the number of defensive maneuvers you can pull off. To do this, I like to fly east and towards my lines, and if possible towards one of my airfields, in the hopes that a random mate sees my fight. While doing that, I like to evade my enemy with some light left and right turns to keep him guessing. When he attacks, I like to roll around so he has to guess which direction I'm turning next. If the enemy comes close, I like to do a split S followed by a barrel roll to shake him off. If you have evaded the attacks long enough, the enemy pilot often gets either impatient and they do more and more risky attacks, or they break off. And all this is a really good achievement. Not every fight has to end with the aerial victory. Often it is absolutely fine if you just survive your fight. After you are clear of enemies, try to relax for a minute and don't get into the next fight right away. Air combat is a stressful affair, so grant your brain some time to cool off before you get into the next fight. But that's it for today. If you have questions, ideas, or something to say about the video, or you want to see Aircraft X next in this series, let me know in the comments. At this point, I have once again to thank my patrons, which are still fueling my video production with some nice caffeine. Thanks for that. If you like my content, consider to support me on Patreon. That really helps a lot, since these videos need time and effort to create. So take a look, the link is in the description, but if not, that's fine as well, of course. I'm happy that those videos get watched. Anyway, I hope I see you in the next one. Bye bye.